Hi Noel, good to see you again after 4 months of isolation and communicating via the internet.
Yes, it's good to meet face to face, isn't it?
Yeah, some things are happening with COVID. Things are happening that's good, I guess, is the football started again. But the industry, the tourism industry is starting to gear up again. People are moving about the country. Resorts are starting to slowly get going, but not fully operational yet. Restaurants are starting with reduced numbers, and we're getting that continuation of social distancing and also cleanliness of hands to make sure the spread doesn't come back again.
Restaurants are dealing with it. They've got a number of things they're doing. They're recording people's names and addresses, people who come. There's limited numbers of people able to go to a restaurant, although that seems to be progressively stepping up. The other thing I've noticed is that accommodation is starting to come back, but I think the accommodation people have been suffering quite a lot.
And certainly the travel industry suffered. The collapse of Virgin is of concern, which affects our regional tourism destinations particularly, but also our inbound, outbound travel.
Yeah, it was all about government regulations, wasn't it? It's not that the industry, the particular businesses weren't profitable. It's not even perhaps that there was enough demand. The issue was the government rules say you can't travel, and that affected the aviation sector significantly. So as you said, our second major airline, Virgin, has gone into administration. Still trading? Is it still trading, I think?
Not sure.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I wonder what we can learn about similar types of events in the past, particularly in Southeast Asian countries, which seem to be affected more than Australia directly. And I'm thinking about the Bali bombings. That's 2002, 2004. Had a major effect on Bali and Indonesia. But is there parallels that we're dealing with here?
Yeah, well, so tourism's experienced a number of different crises over time, hasn't it? Particularly health crises, for example. We had SARS. There was a very interesting one in England. It was a foot and mouth animal disease, but because of that, the rural tourism was pretty much closed down. So you're right, there are a number of examples. And in those, mostly tourism's been pretty resilient. What do you think?
Yes, it would appear certainly from a lot of these, the larger businesses are able to bounce back much quicker, but often a major event like bombings or epidemics, the smaller businesses seem to find it hard to recover, in fact go out of business. So there's a reinvention required of the industry after these types of events. And I'm thinking about SARS and COVID at the same time. I've got the figures here. For SARS, only about 1,000 people are reported to have died from SARS, with 10,000 people officially being recognised as contracting SARS. We're talking quite a big difference between SARS and COVID.
So SARS was also, and many of the crises or health problems that we've had in the past have been regional in terms of a group of countries, perhaps in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in Europe. But this one's different, isn't it? This one's a lot bigger.
Yeah, can we come back to the bombings? And I think we've got two interesting examples. The Bali bombings, recovery was much slower. The 2019 Sri Lankan bombings, recovery seemed to be very quick, relatively. I guess extended time for Bali, short time recovery or short time term event for Sri Lanka. Do you think that's significant?
And in others, the potential seems to be continuing, which then affects the market.
Yeah, the other crisis that certainly comes to mind is the 2004 tsunami that hit right across equatorial Asia in a big way. Lots of tourism disruption, in fact destroyed tourism. The recovery process there seems to be much slower, of course, because of the infrastructure loss. But can we draw parallels from those, the tsunami versus COVID?
I'm less certain about the parallel. Well, it's the global extent of COVID that's the problem. And even during the Asian tsunami, flights are still operating. And so the big difference now is the governments have taken it out of the hands of the tourism industry and are saying you will not travel. And so there is no travel. So that's the thing, and that's the issue, which is then going to perhaps prolong the recovery. There may be demand. I think demand is starting to come back, but the supply, the smaller businesses, as you said, may have actually suffered and gone out of business.
Yeah, one of the things I observed from the tsunami was the rapid attempts to re-establish without thinking about should we be doing this differently. Resorts built exactly the same way or very close to the same way. People were returned to those, but often what didn't happen was the attractions, the places that people went to. Accommodation, restaurants established, but what do people do? And many of the places like national parks had no funding to support their re-establishment. And I guess that is a difference, isn't it, between COVID, because the infrastructure's still there. It's the businesses that are suffering.
The other issue may be the economic impacts long term. So if you've been able to maintain your job during the COVID crisis, you're pretty much okay, and you can travel. But a certain percentage of the population have lost their jobs, have less money, and that is then leading to perhaps their inability to travel as they did before. So a certain percentage of the population of demand is low. We may see a spike of people who can traveling, but then perhaps there's a little bit less over the longer term. Perhaps.
Just coming back to COVID and comparing particularly SARS, because it's probably the closest comparison, relatively a short time, lots of imagery of masks and so forth, and we've certainly got that now. But the big difference is we've got 400,000 deaths reported worldwide, and about 7 million confirmed cases. Now that's going to be an underestimate. What are the implications of that compared to SARS, that had far fewer, 1,000 deaths, and I forget, but very small number relative to COVID.
Didn't you do some work on that in China?
Yeah, in the Chinese area, the Chinese government did exactly what they did this time: shut down, kept people at home, prevented the movement, trying to withhold the impact of it. Obviously, the disease this time is much potentially worse, and the slow ability to get a vaccine to prevent it. So we're really constrained, maybe for another year, with the fear of an outbreak again. And that's Australia, that's Queensland. The rest of the world's going to be in the same situation. It could threaten for quite a while.
Australia's been, is in a relatively good position, being an island, so it's been able to control the spread of the disease quite firmly, and even now we are starting to get domestic travel going again. But the big problem remains, and this is probably what you're talking about, is the international travel. I think one of the key things to think about here is that in most countries, international travel is not the major contributor to the economic impact of tourism. In most countries, it's 60%, 70%, 80% of expenditure is the domestic market. Now, perhaps in countries such as Sri Lanka or in other countries, it's less, but there is still a significant market, especially when people can't travel overseas. So the people in country X, they can't travel and spend their money overseas, and therefore may be likely, once the health risks in that country have been dealt with, to travel within their own country. So there is a positive to that if you can target the domestic market, but that's not what every country does. In some countries, the government only counts international travel in its account. So I think that's a mistake.
If we think about our near neighbour Indonesia, we've got a mixed product. So we do have Bali that's highly dependent, and Jakarta possibly internationally. But most of the other places, you're right, are domestic. So are we going to see or need to see a different strategy depending on the location?
Just following up just briefly, and then we'll go on to that strategy idea. I saw some figures which suggest that in Australia, our balance of international travel favours, we spend more money overseas as Australians than we get as international people coming to Australia. So the lockdown, if there was no international travel in Australia, Australia would be better off.
That's interesting.
But it depends on different countries. You know, some countries are much more dependent on international travel. But if I was a government thinking about the short term, I would be trying to encourage, as they did in Queensland, first short breaks or even just day tripping, and then I would start to move to intra-state or within the country travel. And I think that would be a good way to try and kickstart the tourism businesses again. But countries may need to think about the product that they're offering. So instead of offering an international style product, they might want to focus on domestic.
So what do you think are going to be the drivers? Obviously government and big business investment's going to be important, but what other things are going to really kickstart tourism again? And it really is a kickstart, isn't it? It's starting from scratch almost.
That's a good way of looking at it, Bill. I think it's almost like businesses thinking, who is my market now? And not assuming that it's the same market that they had before the crisis.
But what I'm sensing that we're talking about is the recovery of tourism is going to vary time-wise and extent by country and by location within countries. And that creates a general coordination problem for tourism. And all sectors of tourism, transportation, establishment or re-establishment of resorts and ancillary services, it's not going to be, although it's one system, it's going to be little systems all starting up independently again.
And so that, for me, focuses on coordination. Who's going to do the coordination? Is it government? Is it the private sector? Is it some sort of coordination body? In Queensland, we've got QTIC. It's focusing on the need for lots of different players to be talking to one another.
Yeah, but if I've got a business, I can't wait for those things to happen. I've got to go and do something. And certainly I've got to go and talk to my suppliers, and suppliers mean transport, the people bring people to my destination, the services that I use, I've got to start coordinating them and making sure they're ready to deliver the services that I need. And again, that's putting a lot on a humble tourism business.
At the same time, they're doing that strategic planning. There's also the need to implement the COVID health safety operational system. So distancing, training staff in dealing with health issues and so on. So there's lots of stuff happening. Although businesses may not have customers, there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yes, it's interesting times ahead. Unfortunately, the industry's had a real hit out of this, as lots of businesses have. The recovery will be really interesting to watch, because it'll be interesting to see if that innovation does occur, or whether we go back to business as usual. And that worries me. It'd be good if we could reinvigorate tourism around the world.
Yes, timing is an issue. How long will it take? International, I think, they're talking about travel bubbles, for example, because tourism is international travel is a bilateral decision between two countries. So even if Australia is willing to travel, going to another country is going to be difficult because of the health system in that country. So travel bubbles may develop. But for me personally, I think that the domestic market will be the first area to develop, and that could happen pretty quickly. But then international probably will take more time for two reasons: the bilateral issue of health in the second country, and then the second one is the economic impact and ongoing reduction in economic spending power across the world.
And that's frightening when you say that, because the economic loss leaves businesses with very little store to reinvest and redevelop. So that's a bit of a danger.
The upside, and even in Australia, I have seen that there's demand. You know, you can see that in Australia, that people are starting to look for places to go. They're adapting to the circumstances in terms of where they're going, but demand is coming back. Anyway, interesting times.
Thanks, Noel. Yeah, we'll continue this on, I'm sure, as it continues.
Good. So thanks, mate.
Okay.